Welcome to the new occupation of Ireland, as vulture funds fly in to feast on the corpse of the Irish housing market. This week we've seen Round Hill Capital buy up 174 homes in an estate in Maynooth. Although a little while back they bought up 297 flats in Santry. We've also seen Angelo Gordon buy up 229 homes in Lucan from Cairn Homes. Round Hill Capital have also bought 112 houses in Blanchardstown. They're a huge investment fund based in Delaware in the USA, and they handle about $6.8 billion worth of wealth. Angelo Gordon sounds like an individual, but it's actually another fund, set up by John M. Angelo and Michael L. Gordon. Those two ran a department for L.F. Rothschild in the 1980s, and they run a wealth fund worth $43 billion, buying up real estate all over the world. Now, the government's response to the Vulture takeover is to say, oh, well, we need them to invest in housing because otherwise there'll be no housing. And then they give a half-hearted, oh, well, we'll ring fence 30% of estates for new buyers. But that still means that the Vulture fund can buy up 70% of the estate. And this is the old neoliberal shock doctrine. Naomi Klein, the author, wrote a book called The Shock Doctrine, and in it she explains that the ruling class, the rich, will use a crisis. So the government and their spokespeople say the housing crisis is so bad that we need the vulture funds to invest. And then the vulture funds invest and the housing crisis gets worse. And then the government says, oh, well, now it's worse. So now we definitely need the vulture funds to invest. And the worse it gets, the more they say the vulture funds are necessary to invest. All the while, the government isn't providing public housing. And this week, the vultures were in the newspapers demanding discounts and write-downs on loans from Ulster Bank and KBC. But this has been going on since before NAMA. Between 2012 and 2013, Michael Noonan, the former Fine Gael finance minister, met the vulture funds 65 times. He had meetings with some of the biggest players like Cerberus, Lone Star. Name a vulture fund, he sat down and had lunch with them. So the vulture funds have the ear of the political establishment in a way that you or I will never have. And then they were given loads of tax breaks when they came in. The Section 1110 tax relief was used by the vulture funds for years to escape paying any tax, despite making massive profits on the Irish housing market. Now Ireland's biggest landlord is a vulture fund, Iris Ria, whose parent company is back in Canada. They own 3,884 homes across Ireland. If an alien landed in Ireland and looked at Irish society and asked itself, what's the purpose of this society? They would think that we were working for the landlords, that we were working to pay a mortgage to the banks, that we were working for the vulture funds. And to be honest, the tax haven Irish economy has become an economy that works for corporations, that works for vulture funds, that works for developers and landlords, and not for the ordinary working person. And Leo Varadkar's still insisting that the vulture funds have a role to play. But the only reason they have a role to play is because people like him and Micheál Martin and their political parties Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have run down public housing and refused to build public housing. And then they say, there's no supply of housing. Oh no, we need the vulture funds to supply the housing that we're not supplying. If a government had ever rendered itself unfit to govern by not being able to provide a people with their basic needs, and make no mistake, those who say public housing is free housing don't even understand the concept of public housing. When you live in public housing, you pay differential rent. The more you earn, the more you pay. And in places like Sweden and Austria, public housing isn't just ghetto housing for the poorest people in society. Public housing is for every worker. And so a doctor or a nurse will live alongside someone who works in a factory or someone who's looking for a job. That's how you get your social mix, not by handing public land over to private developers, but by building public housing that's open to everyone, not just the poorest people. Although Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have stopped providing public housing even for the poorest people these days. And so it would make you angry this week when you see Fianna Fáilers on the telly crying crocodile tears over what the vulture funds are doing, where behind the scenes they're wined and dined by the same funds and doing everything they can to put money into the pockets of those funds. And the government has brought in so many tax incentives to lure the vultures to the Irish housing market. They lay out the body of the Irish nation and say, come feast and then cry crocodile tears when the vultures actually do what they've asked them to do. And now the government is suggesting that an affordable home in Dublin is 450,000 and you'd have to earn 120,000 to get it. The only way out of this predicament is to get back on the streets like we did with the water charges. As soon as the old and vulnerable and the majority of people are vaccinated, we need to return to the streets and drive the landlord parties out of office. But even then, the rich will still control the economy and they'll push back against any progressive move we try to make. So in the end, unless we fight for Connolly's vision of a socialist Ireland, where the wealth is in the hands of the people and decisions about what we do with that wealth is in the hands of the people, unless we fight for that kind of society, the vultures, developers and landlords will continue to ruin the lives of the working class here in Ireland.